The tribunal chamber erupted in nervous chatter as the sharp crack of a hand against oak silenced it all. Colonel Matthew Grant, his jaw set like stone, stood at the head of the long table. His palm rested flat on a dossier, but his eyes weren't on the papers, they were locked on the soldier before him. Sergeant Maya Lorenz stood ramrod straight, though her uniform bore stains from long weeks in the logistics yard rather than the spotless polish of parade ground soldiers. She had been called in for what was supposed to be a minor disciplinary review. No one expected fireworks. No one expected Grant's thunderous voice. "Where did you get that mark?" Every head in the chamber turned. It wasn't his question that stunned them. It was his tone. Sharp, trembling, filled with something few had ever heard from Grant. Fear. Maya froze. For months, she had endured whispers, insults, laughter behind her back, and the steady erosion of her name. But now, here in a room of brass and judgment, her sleeve had slipped just enough for the tattoo to show. Black ink, angular, a phoenix made not of curves but of straight lines and hidden geometry, like a cipher burned into her flesh. The silence was instant, heavy, more brutal than any shouted accusation. Across the chamber, Lieutenant Paul Jensen's face drained of color. He had seen the tattoo once before, not on a person, but in a file marked so secret he should never have glimpsed it. He remembered a briefing slide half covered, a quick glimpse of the same jagged bird framed by a warning stamp. Eyes only, Tier 6, operations. But he said nothing. The room, full of officers who had snickered at Maya's so-called disgrace, now shifted in their seats. General staff who had written her off as a failure stared like they had seen a ghost. Maya lowered her sleeve, her expression unreadable. For months, silence had been her armor. She had learned that words could be twisted, bent into nooses. But this silence was different. It wasn't her defense anymore. It was a weapon. "Answer me, Sergeant." Colonel Grant barked again, his voice lower now, urgent. "Where did you get that mark?" Maya's eyes, gray, cold, storm-worn, finally rose to meet his. For the first time in 2 years, she looked an officer dead in the eye without flinching. Her voice was calm, but each syllable struck like steel. "Operation Ashfall." 7 went in, 1 came out. The room gasped. No one spoke. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to falter. The tribunal chamber, usually a theater for bureaucracy and posturing, became a mausoleum for secrets buried too long. Colonel Grant's face shifted from fury to disbelief to a haunted recognition. He had heard of Ashfall, not in reports, because no official reports existed, only in whispers, in conversations that died when doors opened. A mission too costly to admit, too successful to acknowledge, too soaked in blood to be anything but erased. Behind Maya, a murmur spread among the junior officers lined along the wall. Some stared at her in horror, others in awe. A few simply looked afraid. Jensen's heart pounded in his chest. He remembered every rumor he'd overheard about her cowardice, incompetence, betrayal, lies he'd never challenged. And now, watching Grant, the unshakable colonel, freeze at the sight of her ink, Jensen realized the truth was far darker than the gossip. "Clear the chamber," Grant said suddenly, his voice cutting through the paralysis. A captain stammered, "Sir, this is an official." Now, chairs scraped back, uniforms rustled. One by one, officers filed out, confusion etched on their faces. The tribunal was over before it had begun, yet no one dared question why. Within minutes, the chamber was empty except for Colonel Grant, Lieutenant Jensen, and Maya Lorenz, standing in the center like a storm contained in human form. Grant leaned forward, his knuckles whitening on the table. "Do you know what you've just said?" "Yes, sir," Maya replied, her voice steady. "Do you understand what Ashfall means?" Her lips tightened, but she didn't look away. "I lived it." The colonel's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, as if choking on decades of buried truth. Finally, he exhaled. "God help us," he muttered. And for the first time since Maya Lorenz had been branded a failure, the burden of silence began to shift not away, but toward the men who had carried the lie. The storm had broken. Fort Clay, Oklahoma, looked less like a military base and more like a scar pressed into the landscape. Squat concrete buildings spread across the plains, their shadows long in the early morning Sunday. Wind cut across the training fields, carrying grit and gossip with equal ease. In the middle of that windstorm of rumor walked Sergeant Maya Lorenz, head held straight, shoulders squared, jaw clenched against the weight of every whisper. To some, she was invisible. To others, she was an open target. "Isn't that the one who froze up in Yemen?" Private Harker muttered as the squad formed ranks for roll call. His voice carried just enough to reach the ears of nearby soldiers. "Please," Corporal Voss replied, lips curling with the kind of arrogance that only ignorance allows. "I heard she left her squad pinned down. Didn't even fire back. 3 men didn't make it home because of her." A ripple of half-smothered laughter moved through the line, not cruel enough to warrant official discipline, but sharp enough to cut. The kind of laughter that stripped the edges off someone's name, turned it into a punchline. Lieutenant Paul Jensen stood at the front, clipboard in hand, pretending not to hear. His eyes flicked toward Maya only once, catching the way she stood unmoved, unflinching, as if made of stone. But he said nothing. Silence, he told himself, was safer. The morning bugle had barely faded when PT began. Ropes, walls, push-ups, endurance drills. Sweat glistened on every forehead, boots stomped in rhythm, the air thick with dust and strain. Maya hit every mark with mechanical precision. Her rope climb smooth, her push-ups steady, her sprints timed like clockwork. Efficiency without flair. Strength without camaraderie. "Need a hand, reject?" Voss called out as she vaulted a wall. "Wouldn't want you freezing mid-climb again." Chuckles followed, careless but cutting. Maya said nothing. She landed, rolled her shoulders, and kept moving. Words were wasted ammunition, and she had none to spare. At the mess hall, the distance grew wider. Soldiers clustered around tables, trading jokes and stories, their laughter bouncing off steel walls. Maya sat alone at the far end, unwrapping her MRE in silence. The plastic crackle was louder than the conversations that ignored her. Her phone buzzed once. Unknown number. Saw that ink online. Bold pic. She deleted it without hesitation. The tattoo wasn't for display. It was never meant to be seen by anyone outside a circle that no longer existed. Every time the lines caught her eye, sharp wings, rising phoenix, it reminded her of promises buried under classified files. Promises that cost 6 lives. Promises the world would never honor. Still, the barracks thrived on stories, and stories didn't care about truth. "She's been busted down twice," someone whispered near the water station. "They're only keeping her around out of pity." "They should have kicked her out already," another voice chimed in. "She's poison." The rumors snowballed, growing heavier with every retelling. Facts weren't just twisted, they were drowned. What really happened didn't matter anymore. Perception had become reality, and reality had no space for Sergeant Maya Lorenz. By dusk, when the sun bled into the horizon and drills ended, she walked back to her bunk through a gauntlet of side glances and quiet sneers. Her boots hit the gravel in steady rhythm, each step a refusal to bow. But inside her chest, silence tightened like a vice. Silence had protected her for 2 years. Silence had kept her alive. But silence was also burying her, one rumor at a time. And somewhere deep in her memory, beneath the noise of gossip and laughter, gunfire still echoed gunfire from a place that never existed, a place where her voice had been stolen along with the truth. Fort Clay treated her like a ghost. The bitter irony was that once, she really had been one. The barracks always smelled faintly of disinfectant and sweat. A reminder that no matter how much polish you put on military life, grime always seeped through the cracks. For Maya Lorenz, those cracks had become canyons. Morning inspection brought the cruelty into focus. Boots lined up in perfect rows, uniforms stiff and pressed, faces clean-shaven and expectant. And then there was Maya uniform regulation but faded at the cuffs, boots polished yet scuffed from hours spent in the logistics yard instead of drills. She stood silent, eyes fixed forward, as Lieutenant Jensen strode down the line. His gaze lingered a fraction of a second longer on her than anyone else, but when Corporal Voss snickered under his breath, Jensen kept walking. He had already convinced himself that neutrality was the safest stance, even if neutrality was its own brand of betrayal. The whispers didn't stop when roll call ended. "Bet she freezes if someone yells, 'Boo,'" one recruit muttered. "Should have been stripped of rank by now," another said, just loud enough for her to hear. It wasn't outright cruelty, never enough to cross into punishable territory. It was the casual venom of people convinced they were right, their smug certainty gnawing at her existence. During gear check that afternoon, the harassment turned sharper. Maya shrugged off her jacket, rolling up her sleeves as she inspected her weapon. The room went quiet, then a voice broke the silence. "What's that on your arm?" Private Ortega leaned in, eyes narrowing at the ink etched into her skin. The tattoo's sharp lines forming an angular bird, its wings geometric, its head bent like a falcon in dive, wasn't decorative. It was a cipher disguised as art. "Looks like some failed art project," Voss sneered. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture before she could tug her sleeve back down. The shutter click echoed like a gunshot. Within minutes, the image was everywhere. Barracks chats lit up. Group texts buzzed with captions. By the time dinner rolled around, everyone had seen it. "Check this out. Lorenz thinks she's part of some secret club. Phoenix Chicken? What the hell is that supposed to be?" The laughter spread like wildfire. Casual but cruel. To them, it was just another prop for their running joke. Sergeant Lorenz, the failure who clung to illusions of relevance. But Lieutenant Jensen didn't laugh. When he saw the image flash across his phone, his stomach twisted. He'd seen it before, not in memes or texts, but in half-buried intelligence files during a late-night clearance pull. Files stamped Obsidian Archive, the kind of stamp that meant even glancing at the page was a career risk. He remembered the emblems scrawled in the margins, tied to words like Tier 6 and Ashfall Directive. Words no one said aloud, words that disappeared if you asked too many questions. Now that same symbol was burned into Maya Lorenz's arm, mocked in the open by recruits who had no idea they were laughing at a ghost of something they couldn't comprehend. Jensen clenched his jaw. He wanted to say something, but fear of exposure pinned his tongue. Speaking up meant admitting he knew what he shouldn't. And in the army, sometimes silence was the only shield an officer had. So he looked away. Again, at dinner, Maya sat alone as usual, the harsh light glinting off her metal tray. The laughter around her was louder that night, fueled by the image now circulating like wildfire. Every chuckle, every glance, every whisper was a verdict. Guilty of being less, guilty of being broken, guilty of daring to exist in their ranks. She lifted her fork, steady hands betraying nothing, and took her first bite. But her silence wasn't empty. It was a storm gathering behind her eyes, biding its time. And storms never stayed quiet forever. The clip spread faster than rumor ever could. A 30-second video, grainy from a phone camera, showed Maya Lorenz in the supply building. 3 younger soldiers surrounded her, shoving crates into her path, sloshing grease across her uniform while laughing into the lens. "Come on, Sergeant," one of them jeered. "Show us that famous retreat maneuver." The camera shook with cruel laughter as Maya bent down to move the crate, her face unreadable, her silence unbroken. She didn't argue, didn't lash out, just kept stacking, methodical as clockwork. Drop out," another voice chanted, the sound ricocheting around the room. When the clip hit the barracks chat group, the captions wrote themselves: "Retreat Queen, Frozen Lawrence, Grease Monkey." By the evening meal, everyone had seen it. By midnight, it had leaked beyond Fort Clay's walls, surfacing in private groups where soldiers mocked washouts and shared memes. Lieutenant Jensen saw it from the doorway of the supply building before it ever went online. He'd stood there, frozen. As the scene unfolded, Maya hunched over her work while laughter tore at her from all sides. His fists had clenched at his sides. His training screamed at him to intervene. But fear held him back. Not fear of those privates, but fear of what it meant to step into the line of fire against the collective judgment of the base. To defend Maya Lorenz was to inherit her label, to be marked as tainted, so he walked away. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he opened his laptop, logging into classified databases. He wasn't supposed to use them for personal curiosity, but the image of Maya's tattoo burned behind his eyes. The angular phoenix, the geometric wings, it wasn't random, it was a marker. Hours of searching pulled up fragments, each redacted to near uselessness. Mentions of Tier 6 operations. Files labeled Ashfall Directive. Names blacked out, locations wiped clean. But one line kept returning. Buried in multiple reports. 7 deployed. 1 returned. The same words Maya had spoken in the tribunal chamber. Jensen leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. The barracks had painted her as a coward. The gossip said she'd frozen and gotten men killed. But the records, the hidden records, told a different story. She wasn't a failure. She was a survivor of something so buried, so dangerous, that the army itself had rewritten her history to protect the secret. And now, because of that silence, an entire base mocked her while the truth sat rotting in classified vaults. The injustice gnawed at him, sharper than any reprimand he'd ever received. He remembered her silence in the face of their taunts. Not weakness, not cowardice, something else, something heavier. He closed his laptop and pressed his hands against his face. If he said nothing, he was complicit. If he spoke, he risked everything. Either way, silence wouldn't hold much longer. Because Maya Lorenz wasn't just a rumor. She was a fuse. And someone had just lit the match. The storm inside Maya Lorenz had a name. Operation Ashfall. It wasn't in any official history book. It wasn't even whispered in the training halls. The mission had been erased as if it had never happened except for the survivors. And there had only been one. 18 months earlier, she'd worn a different name, carried a different set of papers. The team she served with didn't exist on rosters. No uniforms with patches, no call signs anyone would admit to hearing. Just 7 shadows dropped into the red corridor of Yemen, a kill zone marked on every NATO map as a place no unit should ever enter. Their task: extract a political prisoner whose survival threatened to topple governments. The orders came with no support, no backup plan. Tier 6 meant they went in alone. And if they failed, they'd vanish like smoke. Families told it was training deaths. No graves, no honors. The first 12 hours went flawlessly. Insertion under night cover, moving through alleys laced with sensors and watchtowers. They reached the target, an investigative journalist, half-starved but alive, pulled him from his cell and ghosted back through ruins without raising alarms. But then the trap snapped shut. Too many checkpoints, too much precision. Their route had been sold. In less than a minute, 6 operators lay dead in the dust, cut down by overlapping fields of fire. Maya dragged the journalist behind a slab of shattered concrete as bullets tore the air into ribbons. 2 choices: abandon him and escape, or fight an unwinnable fight. She chose the impossible. For 3 hours, she hauled him through burning streets, ducking from ruin to ruin. Her rifle jammed and was tossed aside. Her sidearm emptied, then her last magazine gone. Shrapnel slashed her shoulder, blood soaking her fatigues. But she didn't stop. When they reached the alternate extraction site, the Black Hawk hovered low, blades chopping smoke. She shoved the journalist aboard, ordering the pilot to lift. "No time," the co-pilot shouted. "We can't come back." "I know," she replied. She stayed behind, covering their departure from a collapsing rooftop, hurling grenades until her vest was empty. When the bird vanished into the smoke, silence fell, broken only by her ragged breath. For 4 days, she staggered through hostile terrain alone, half delirious, sustained only by sheer refusal to quit. When she finally crossed into friendly ground, she collapsed. The debrief lasted 6 hours. Every detail logged, every shot fired, analyzed. Then the files were locked away under layers of clearance she would never see again. Officially, Operation Ashfall never happened. Unofficially, her life shattered. The journalist lived, but his name never appeared in any report. The 6 dead men were listed as casualties from training accidents. And Maya Lorenz, whose real name had been scrubbed, was reassigned to Fort Clay under a false file, branded a failure. Her new record: tactical blunders, friendly fire, insubordination, enough fact to be believable, enough fiction to bury the truth. Her silence wasn't cowardice. It was enforced. It was survival. But as she scrubbed floors and stacked crates, listening to children in uniform laugh at her back, one truth burned hotter than any shame. She had kept the promise. 7 went in. 1 came out. And she would carry all 7 forever. The days at Fort Clay bled together: grit, drills, and silence. But sometimes fate doesn't knock. It kicks the door off its hinges. That kick came in the form of General Marcus Keene. Keene's inspections were legend, less visits than ambushes. 4 decades in uniform had taught him that the rot of complacency hid in the cracks, behind polished boots and rehearsed salutes. He never announced his arrival. He simply appeared, gray hair clipped close, voice like gravel dragged across steel. eyes sharp enough to strip men bare without a word. Fort Clay wasn't expecting him for months, so when his convoy rolled through the gates unannounced, the entire base convulsed. Formation lines scrambled into order, uniforms yanked straight, officers barking commands to hide the mess. Maya Lorenz wasn't called to the parade ground. Supply crew didn't get inspections, especially not disgraced sergeants with black marks in their file. She remained in the warehouse, sleeves rolled up, moving crates for the next day's drills. Her motions precise, efficient. Keene moved differently than other generals. He didn't linger on salutes or smiles. He drifted through garages, barracks, training yards watching, listening. Every step built a mosaic in his mind. He trusted eyes more than reports. That's how he found himself outside the supply hangar, drawn by the quiet rhythm of order inside. Through the bay doors, he saw her. A lone soldier, hair pulled tight, arms steady as she shifted gear onto pallets. Something about her posture stopped him cold. Not the stiffness of clerical work. Not the hesitance of the disgraced. It was gravity. The kind of poise that came only from years, in places where one wrong move meant death. He stepped closer, boots echoing on concrete. Maya turned instinctively, snapping into attention with a precision that startled him. No hesitation, no fumbling, just crisp, drilled reflex. His eyes narrowed. Veterans move that way, not broken veterans, not washed-out soldiers, but survivors of battles they weren't supposed to win. Then he saw it. Her sleeve slipped as she reached overhead, revealing black ink cut into her skin. Not decorative, not careless. Mission grade. The symbol struck him like a fist. Angular wings. Phoenix rising. Geometric precision. He'd seen it once before. Not on a soldier's arm, but in a locked dossier marked eyes only. The kind of file generals whispered about after midnight, knowing even their rank barely bought them clearance. He froze mid-step. His voice dropped low, carrying the weight of memory and suspicion. "Sergeant, where did you get that mark?" The warehouse air stilled. Even the hum of forklifts outside seemed to vanish. For the first time in 2 years, Maya Lorenz met a superior's eyes without flinching. Her reply was steady, carved in stone. Tier 6. Operation Ashfall. 7 in. 1 out. Keene's blood ran cold. He remembered the file, remembered the fragments. A mission whispered to have shifted the balance of an entire conflict. A mission erased from record, its survivors buried in lies. A mission with only one return. The silence between them was more deafening than any shout. General Keene's stare lingered on her, as if trying to reconcile two impossible truths: the warehouse worker before him and the phantom from the Ashfall dossier. "Lieutenant Jensen," Keene's voice cracked across the yard like a rifle shot. The young officer nearly tripped over himself, rushing inside. "Sir!" Keene didn't take his eyes off Maya. "I want Sergeant Lorenz's file. Not the sanitized garbage. The black archive." Jensen blinked, his mouth dry. The black archive wasn't even supposed to exist at his clearance level. "Sir, I don't—" "Now, Lieutenant." Keene's tone left no room for hesitation. Jensen bolted. Around them, words spread like a shockwave. A general had spoken her name. Soldiers who had spent months sneering at her now loitered at a distance, curiosity gnawing at their bravado. The same recruits who once mocked her tattoo found excuses to drift toward the warehouse, their laughter dying in their throats. Keene circled her slowly, as though he were examining a relic from a forgotten war. His voice was low, measured, but carried the weight of judgment. "They told me no one made it out alive," he muttered half to himself. 6 ghosts in a file sealed shut. And yet here you stand. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't bow under his gaze. She simply stood at attention, her eyes forward, her silence heavier than any plea. Minutes later, Jensen returned, his face pale, clutching a slim black folder stamped with security clearances he hadn't even known existed. His hands trembled as he passed it to Keene. The general opened it, and the color drained from his weathered face. Each page cut deeper. Her role, her choices, the impossible extraction, the 4-day crawl through hell. Reports signed and countersigned. Every detail classified beyond belief. And then the cruel twist. Her reassignment orders, falsified records, disciplinary notations forged to cover truths that could never be spoken. Her honor erased not because she failed, but because she succeeded in a mission no one could admit happened. Keen's jaw tightened. He snapped the folder shut with a crack that echoed across the warehouse. "This is a disgrace," he growled, loud enough for every eavesdropper to hear. "Not yours, Sergeant, ours." The words cut through the gathered crowd like shrapnel. Soldiers who had jeered at her days before now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her eyes. The weight of their ignorance pressed down hard, smothering their arrogance. Keen turned to the gawking onlookers. His voice boomed. "You mocked her. You doubted her. And all the while, she carried a truth none of you could bear. Sergeant Lorenz is not a failure. She is the only reason 6 men's sacrifice wasn't in vain. While you laughed at grease on her uniform, she wore scars none of you could survive." No one dared move. The silence was absolute. Maya's face didn't change, but a storm churned behind her eyes. She hadn't wanted this exposure. She hadn't asked for vindication. And yet here it was raw, unstoppable, a flood breaking through the dam of lies. General Keen snapped back to Jensen. "As of this moment, her record is suspended from public access. Only Black Archive documentation applies. Do you understand me, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir," Jensen barked, his voice shaking. The general's gaze returned to Maya. He saluted sharp, deliberate, a gesture that carried the weight of 4 decades of service. Every eye in the room widened. A general saluting a soldier they had treated like dirt. Maya held still. The salute was a hammer breaking the last chains of silence. But vindication carried a cost. Because once the truth stepped into the light, there was no putting it back into the dark. The next hours tore through Fort Clay like a wildfire. Clips of the warehouse incident, grease poured, crates shoved, jeers echoing hit the open net before command could choke them. Civilians, veterans groups, advocacy circles all seized on the footage. By dawn, hashtags were trending. Number Justice for Lorenz. Number Ashfall Survivor. Number Honor the Hidden. What had been casual barracks, cruelty had exploded into a national storm. In the mess hall, recruits hunched over phones, their laughter silenced. Each replay of the video made their stomachs turn. Faces pale, appetites vanished. Some slipped away, ashamed to be seen at her table. General Keen convened an emergency briefing in the main hall. Officers packed the space, whispers cutting off the moment he entered. His presence radiated like a furnace, his voice iron hard. "This institution failed Sergeant Lorenz. While she guarded our secrets, we stripped her of dignity. We cannot undo what was done, but we will not continue it." He laid the Black Archive folder on the podium, its stamp visible for all. "Her name is cleared, effective immediately." The declaration thundered through the base. For some, relief. For others, dread. Lieutenant Jensen stepped forward, sweat beading on his brow. "Sir, permission to speak." Keen gave a curt nod. "I witnessed the hazing. I said nothing. I failed to act." Jensen's voice cracked. He looked at Maya, standing at the back of the hall, her posture rigid but her eyes unyielding. "Sergeant Lorenz, I owe you an apology not as an officer, but as a man who didn't have the courage to protect one of his own." The room shifted, soldiers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. It was rare, unheard of, for a junior officer to admit such failure publicly. Keen let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then, quietly but firmly, "Remember this. Cowardice isn't always on the battlefield. Sometimes it's in the silence of bystanders." He turned, scanning the ranks. "And make no mistake, you will all remember this day, because what happened here is not a blemish on one soldier. It is a stain on all of us." Maya remained stone still, but inside, her heart pounded like a war drum. Vindication wasn't sweet. It was bitter, heavy, laced with the memories of 6 dead men whose names still couldn't be spoken. Later that night, Keen called her into his office. The door closed with a quiet click. For the first time, the old general's voice softened. "You didn't deserve this burden. But sometimes history makes its martyrs in silence." He leaned forward, eyes hard. "What do you want, Sergeant? I can reinstate your rank, return you to SOCOM, put you back where you belong." Maya shook her head. "With respect, sir, I've spent 2 years living abandoned. I know what that weight feels like. I want to use it." He frowned. "Use it? I want the transition unit, the wounded, the forgotten, the ones we write off because their scars don't fit neat boxes. That's where I belong." For a long moment, Keene said nothing. Then he nodded once, sharply. "So be it." When Maya left his office, the base was hushed. Soldiers stepped aside in the hall, no one daring to meet her gaze. For the first time, the silence wasn't mocking. It was reverent. And yet, beneath the quiet, a storm brewed beyond the gates. Media trucks, advocacy groups, congressional staffers, justice demanded a reckoning. The truth of Ashfall would not stay buried forever. 3 weeks later, Washington smelled blood. The video of Maya's humiliation, combined with the revelation of her black archive file, had ignited more than social outrage. Senators demanded hearings. Veterans groups staged vigils outside bases. Headlines screamed about ghost soldiers and sacrifices erased by bureaucracy. The Pentagon scrambled to contain the fire. But truth, once freed, spread like shrapnel. Inside a secure conference room, stripped bare of cameras and pomp, General Keene stood beside Maya. His weathered hand held a sealed document, the kind usually buried for decades. Around the table sat officers in starched uniforms, each face tight with discomfort. Keene's voice filled the silence. "Sergeant First Class Maya Lorenz," he began, "displayed extraordinary courage during Operation Ashfall. Under hostile conditions, with her team annihilated, she executed the extraction of a critical asset and prevented a wider regional war. She alone carried the mission to success. The record will now reflect this truth." His words landed like artillery. Maya, in full-dress uniform for the first time in years, accepted the reinstated commendations with steady hands. The Defense Superior Service Medal, the Bronze Star with Valor. Decorations that weighed less than the silence she had carried, yet so much heavier for what they cost. She hadn't asked for this ceremony. She hadn't wanted the spotlight. And yet here she stood, a living rebuke to the system that had buried her. Lieutenant Jensen rose unexpectedly. His voice was low but clear, trembling with the weight of shame. "Sergeant Lorenz, I failed you. I saw what they did to you. I didn't speak. I chose silence over courage. For that, I offer not just apology, but accountability. I'll accept any consequence you see fit." Maya turned her gaze on him sharp, unflinching. The same gaze that once stared down death in alleys lit by gunfire. "Apology accepted," she said simply. Then, after a beat, "Remember this, Lieutenant. Courage isn't medals or speeches. It's protecting the ones who can't protect themselves. Don't fail the next soldier." The room was silent, heavy with the truth of her words. Keene cleared his throat. "Sergeant Lorenz has made her choice. Instead of returning to SOCOM, she will join the Warrior Transition Unit. She believes her experience 2 years abandoned, stripped of honor, can help others find a way back." A ripple of disbelief passed through the officers. But no one spoke. When Maya left the room, the flash of cameras didn't follow her. The recognition would remain classified, sealed in files that the public would never read. But outside those walls, the storm kept growing. Advocacy groups demanded reform. Veterans posted their own hidden emblems, tattoos, or mission coins, never meant for public eyes. Stories began surfacing other forgotten names, other erased sacrifices. And through it all, Maya Lorenz remained silent. Not broken, not erased, silent by choice, guarding dignity like a weapon. Because some victories weren't meant for parades, they were meant to change the system itself. The storm didn't fade. It evolved. 6 months after the warehouse incident, the Department of Defense announced a sweeping initiative, the Silent Emblem Project. Its mission was clear, unearth, and honor service members whose contributions had been hidden under the iron veil of classification. Old files reopened. Families of the fallen received letters, sometimes decades late, explaining that their loved ones had not been training accidents, but heroes in shadows. Quiet veterans who had lived half their lives as failures were suddenly recognized for impossible missions. At Fort Clay, things shifted too. Barracks that once whispered rumors now displayed a plaque. "Respect is the foundation. Silence is not weakness." Every new recruit was shown footage of Maya enduring abuse in silence, followed by General Keene's salute. It became mandatory training, a cautionary tale against arrogance, a lesson in humility. Lieutenant Jensen, promoted after publicly admitting his failure, emerged as a surprising voice for reform. His lectures weren't polished, his delivery wasn't elegant, but his words carried the authenticity of guilt transformed into resolve. "Don't be me," he told young officers. "Don't stand silent while the strong prey on the isolated. If you do, you've already failed your oath." Meanwhile, Maya kept her promise. She reported quietly to the Warrior Transition Unit. Her days filled with scarred soldiers, learning to live again, men missing limbs, women carrying invisible wounds, warriors whose battles didn't end when the shooting stopped. She didn't lecture them. She didn't flaunt medals. She listened. She showed them how to hold their ground when the weight of whispers threatened to crush them. But the symbol on her arm had grown beyond her. Across bases, soldiers began sketching their own emblems, marks of missions never recorded. Photos appeared online, some blurred, some clear, each captioned with a single phrase, "We were there." The movement rattled the highest levels of command. Congress held hearings. Reporters demanded access to sealed files. The Pentagon resisted, but the pressure was unrelenting. The silent Emblem project grew teeth. Through it all, Maya remained quiet, her presence almost spectral. She declined interviews. She turned down public recognition. She refused invitations to stand on stages beside generals. Her reason was simple, spoken only once to General Keane during a private call. "Sir, I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be useful. Let the emblem speak louder than me." Keane, retired by then, simply nodded across the line. He understood. And yet, despite her refusal, she had already become a legend not because of what she said, but because of what she endured. The silence she carried had transformed into a chorus. And that chorus would not stop. 1 year later, the echoes of Maya's story had crystallized into something permanent. At the Special Warfare Center in Virginia, a new training block launched for junior officers, the Lorenz Legacy Program. Its insignia, a stylized phoenix rising through geometric lines, was unmistakable. The very mark that once drew scorn in a warehouse now stood as a symbol of resilience, carved into banners, manuals, and challenge coins. Lieutenant Colonel Jensen, now head of ethics and leadership training, addressed the program's first class. Rows of sharp young officers filled the lecture hall, notebooks open, eyes forward. Yet unease lingered in their posture. They expected a pep talk about victory. Instead, Jensen delivered something far heavier. "This course exists because we failed," he began. His voice was steady, but the memory of shame still bled through every word. "We failed to see excellence behind misunderstood silence. We failed to question easy narratives. We failed to defend a comrade when it mattered most." The room shifted uncomfortably. Military education wasn't supposed to sound like confession. "She doesn't teach this course herself," Jensen continued. "She told me her story isn't the point. The point is what it teaches. Character doesn't reveal itself during applause. It shows when no one is watching." At the back of the hall, a wall-sized screen flickered to life. Without warning, the raw warehouse footage played the jeers, the grease, the silent endurance. Some officers flinched. Others shifted in their seats, visibly disturbed. "Look at her," Jensen said. "Then look at yourselves. Would you have stood silent, or would you have spoken? That choice defines you more than any mission." Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in the Colorado Rockies, Maya Lorenz was far from classrooms and lecture halls. She ran a transition center built not on bureaucracy, but on trust. Veterans arrived quietly, referred by whispers, coded emails, or a nod from someone who knew the way. No brochures, no websites, just a fire pit out back, a circle of chairs, and someone who understood the cost of silence. That evening, she sat with 6 former operators, each carrying scars deeper than flesh. They spoke haltingly, fragments of missions, fragments of pain. Maya didn't press. She didn't offer platitudes. She listened. When the fire burned low, a young ranger, barely 24, whispered, "I read what they did to you, how you survived being called a failure. I think I need someone who knows what that feels like." Maya rolled up her sleeve, letting the tattoo catch the firelight. The angular phoenix seemed to shift in the glow. "Tell me," she said softly, "what you can't tell anyone else." And the circle leaned in. Here, in the dark mountains, no medals glistened. No generals saluted. No cameras intruded. Here, Silence didn't isolate, it healed. Winter fell heavy in the Rockies, the mountains wrapped in white silence. At the transition center, snow muffled the world, but inside the lodge, the fire crackled warm and steady. Maya Lorenz walked the perimeter as she always did, habit, reflex, duty that never left her bones. Every fence post, every gate latch, every shadow under the pines got her watchful eye. The veterans inside slept soundly because she still carried the vigilance of war. Her phone buzzed against the quiet. No caller ID, a secure line. She opened the message with steady hands. Congressional hearing on justice reform. Your testimony could move the needle. Will you come? Minetta. General Keene, retired but still fighting his wars, had not forgotten her. Maya stared at the glowing screen. For a long moment, the only sound was the crunch of her boots in the snow. Then she typed back, better to serve from the shadows. Let the reform speak louder than me. She slid the phone into her pocket and breathed in the mountain air. Sharp, pure, free of the whispers that once poisoned her every step. Behind her, laughter drifted faintly from the lodge voices of veterans who had found each other in the silence. A ranger with shaking hands, a SEAL haunted by unacknowledged missions, a medic who'd seen too much. They were building something together. Not monuments, not headlines, but survival. Later, she joined them by the fire pit. Sparks floated into the frozen night. They told stories that would never reach books or films. Stories of comrades lost, of missions denied, of dignity stolen but reclaimed. Maya listened, sometimes speaking, more often silent. Her presence itself was proof that silence could carry weight without breaking. The fire burned low, embers glowing like watchful eyes. She looked down at the tattoo on her arm, the black lines catching a shard of moonlight. Once mocked, once hidden. Now it was a beacon not of glory, but of survival. Some victories were not parades. They were quiet centers on mountain ridges. Whispers passed from one survivor to another. Dignity returned without fanfare. Maya Lorenz knew she would never erase the scars, but she also knew she didn't need to. Because now, in the quiet, surrounded by those who understood, she was exactly where she needed to be. The silence was no longer a cage. It was home.